time. Hello. All right, so if it sounds like I'm reading off a script, it's because I am, but as my fourth grade self would have said when failing a math test, I'm trying. So welcome everyone to the Marketing Masterclass by Bloom in partnership with Startups Magazine. I'm Anton Brisinger, the chief editor at Startups Magazine. And for anyone who isn't already aware, Bloom is an award-winning brand marketing agency for startups and scale-ups, with work featured in the likes of Forbes, Sifted, and of course, Startups Magazine. They've helped some of the UK's most exciting startups achieve the next stage in their growth journeys, with clients listed in the country's top 5 startups. They've been around for over 5 years, and in that time, they've seen the most common pitfalls and traps that startups need to avoid. In the next 20 minutes, the Bloom marketing director, Jess Hall, and founder Stephanie Melodia, did I say that correctly?
No, but it's fine. I
How
pronounce
do I
your
say it?
surname
Just so I
much
know.
worse. I'm glad you said your surname because I was like, I've got no idea how to say it.
How do I say your last name?
Melodia. It was close.
Melodia. Is that right? Yeah.
Well done.
Stephanie Melodia will share some of their insights and top tips to help your brand go from scrappy startup to sophisticated scale up. There'll be time for questions at the end and a special freebie for those of you who can stick around. Feel free to reach out to any of the Bloom team on LinkedIn if you want to talk about any of this in more detail. Over to you, Jess.
Thank you. I will just hopefully be sharing. So Steph, do you want to intro Bloom?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction, Anton. So I am the founder of Bloom. I set up the business 5.5 years ago. And as Anton read it very well from his script there, in those past 5.5 years, we have worked with actually 100 startups and scale-ups, and of course, spoken to many more founders in that time. And of course, we've spotted a trend or two, and we've seen lots of kind of common marketing myths that many startup scale-ups kind of believe into, and some of the traps and common pitfalls that they all kind of fallen into as well. So we're here to change that. We've got some really fantastic insights to share with you, very much anti kind of shiny new thing and taking it back to the fundamentals. And so really pleased to, really want to thank you all as well for taking the time out of your busy schedules today to join us, and also to say well done, because we know that everyone's got lots going on at the moment. We know that it's hard to carve out time to learn and listen to the experts. So big well done for taking out that time and spending your lunch break with us today. So without further ado, I'll hand back to Jess.
Great, thanks, Steph. I am really jealous of everyone who is currently eating lunch, because I'm a big fan of lunch. But let me just zoom back up here. So over the next 20-25 minutes, I'm going to focus in on 3 key areas and offer up some tools, tactics, and frameworks that you and your team can navigate your way through these pitfalls. The volume of ideas we're going to touch on is high, and so you could think of this as a bit of a practical guide or a navigation guide to what is out there rather than a detailed how-to. But obviously feel free to get in touch if you want to dive into anything in more detail afterwards. So very broadly, we're going to look at 3 kind of main pitfalls, 3 kind of concepts. The first is around understanding what's in it for them, understanding and building your messaging around the benefits your customers gain versus the product that you are selling. Then secondly, it's about being easy to mind, being top of mind when your customer is in market for your product. Spoiler alert, this may not be right now. So for that, it's about balancing the long and the short. And then finally, about being easy to find. So focusing your resources to achieve your strategic goals. As Anton said, there will be questions at the end. So please do feel free to be noting down anything you want to ask about in more detail as we go through. So firstly, a word of warning: if you came here looking for a miracle tactic, you're in the wrong place. I'm not about to tell you that by combining ChatGPT and TikTok during a phase of the moon in the metaverse, you'll get all of the sales that you desire. Instead,
that is the only reason I came, so I'm leaving.
I'm so sorry. Instead, boring reality, we're here because the fact is there are 3 stages of thinking that will really help set you up for success long before you get to any miracle tactics. And of course, we know that as a startup, you don't have the luxury of months and months of abstract strategy work. But the reality is if you skip strategy entirely, you will pay for it in higher acquisition costs and a constant need for high performance marketing spend. So trap number 1. If you build it, they will come. Some of you might be old enough to remember this film.
If you build it, he will come. If you build it, he will come.
So someone's correctly guessed Field of Dreams. I'm now trapped in the Field of Dreams. There we go. Anybody who remembers it will remember that Kevin Costner was visited by these ghosts of baseball players and told to build a pitch in his garden, and all the baseball players turned up. I think I've just ruined the film, but never mind. And the reality is that, you know, this isn't what happens with startups. We know that there are some founders on this call, and you know, I'm sorry to start by breaking your hearts. As better brains than mine have pointed out, brands are tiny things in people's lives, and you have poured your heart and soul into your new venture. But I have to let you know, it's surprisingly common for us to kind of come up to this belief that surely people only need to hear about your product, you know, once in passing to want it. And this may prove true for a small handful of early adopters, and, you know, we all love them. But it won't be true for the rest of your addressable market, who are busy going about their lives, worrying about all the daily trials we have, and not paying much attention to, you know, a startup launch or a product launch. According to Startups Magazine, just over 800,000 businesses launched in 2021, and, you know, they don't all have customers there waiting for them. So many of those will need to begin by addressing what we see as the first 2 obstacles: product market fit and awareness. So firstly, product market fit. Broadly speaking, this is the extent to which your product or service meets the needs of your target audience. And there are plenty of things you can do to align your product more to product market fit. But one of the really useful side effects from a marketing perspective of really thinking about product market fit is that it forces you into listening to your customers and thinking about your product or service from the point of view of the customer, and really noticing how this changes over time. A practical example of a company that lost out from not noticing a shift in their product market fit would be thinking about Skype versus Zoom at the start of the pandemic. According to HubSpot, there's a 40% rule, which is a sort of popular metric for understanding product market fit survey results. Anton, you've got your hand up. What's going on?
So I was actually genuinely just really curious about that. Why did, because I know nothing about it, why did Zoom eclipse Skype so drastically? Because I still have it like ingrained. I'm like, oh yeah, let's Skype later. And then I realized like, oh, it's not 2009. You know what I mean?
Yeah, number of reasons. I think ease of use. Skype was always a pain. You had to create an account. You have to often pay. It was less user friendly, I think, and Zoom just kind of made it so much easier for people to do what they needed to do. So I think they were, you know, maybe listening to the customer a bit more, not tied into legacy software.
Zoom is behind COVID-19. That's why they're doing so
well. Yeah, maybe.
All right, anyway, but thank you though. I'm gonna shut up. I was just genuinely really curious.
No, that's fine. So yeah, the 40% rule, it's the idea is that if more than 40% of your customers are happy, you know, to say that they would be very disappointed if they no longer have access to your product or service, or they consider it a must-have in the sense that they wouldn't have an alternative to use if you were no longer there, then you really have created a product that fits into the market. So in other words, if you took your product away and this would be your customer's response, then you can be pretty confident in your product market fit. This, by the way, is one of 2 appearances by this chap, so you'll have to forgive me for squeezing 2 Gollums and 2 Kevin Costners into this presentation. But how do we get there? It fundamentally comes down to listening to your customer. You have to understand that you are not the customer. You know your product too well. You forgive its flaws. You know what you're trying to say on your website. You know where the button is and what it does. You have more, you care more, and you have more patience than any of your customers ever will. And you really, really want to talk about your product's features. Meanwhile, the customer wants to know.
This one's called What's in It for Me? What's in it for me?
So you need to keep picturing this customer in the corner of your room going, well, what's in it for me? I also need to learn how to skip to the next slide. There we go. So that's really the key, is kind of listening to the customer, understanding what problems they need solving and why it matters to them. So I'd really encourage you to learn more about something called the benefit ladder when considering your messages. We will come back to this in a little bit more detail later, but this is where you take your product and its features, and then you try and understand, you know, rather than talking about your features, what are the benefits that the product gives to your customers, and then what is the benefit that customer gains from them. So you're sort of taking it from, you know, we have a gizmo that does this, to these are the things that now you can do. And that now you can is a really useful copywriting tip as well for your website. If you put now you can in front of what it is that your product lets your customer do, and then remove the now you can, you get a really nice snappy headline. Part of understanding the customer benefit is understanding the job that they are hiring you to do, and understanding what else they might hire instead. And sometimes at this point, marketers and founders can get stuck into talking about personas and kind of coming up with these elaborate personas for, you know, our customer is Grace, she's a university graduate, she has dogs, she does this, that, and the other. And personas can be useful, but they're often created out of pure fluff. Especially when you're new and you don't really have a data set of customers to build them from a kind of grounding in reality. And so if you find that your personas aren't differentiated enough to give you solid targets, or they're not really helping, one of the things that you might look at this point is something called the jobs to be done framework. And this is really understanding what they're hiring you to do. So the classic kind of story about the jobs to be done framework is McDonald's were marketing some milkshakes, and they had all of their demographics. They understood who was buying the milkshakes. They understood, you know, it was all the different demographics, and they couldn't work out why and how to sell more of them. They spent a lot of time on research on improving flavors of milkshakes and so on, and it just had no impact. So they brought in Clay Christensen to do some work with them, and one of his colleagues stood in a McDonald's for 18 hours watching people buy milkshakes. And from that, they noticed that around 50% of them were sold before 8:30 in the morning. And when they asked those people, and they noticed they were often on their own, they bought the milkshake and then they got in the car and they drove off. And so they started asking people what it is that they were doing with those milkshakes and what else they would have hired to do that job instead. And people were saying things like donuts, bagels, Snickers, bananas. And from that, they worked out that the milkshakes were actually being used as a commuter breakfast. They're filling, they can be consumed one-handed while driving. They don't disappear too quickly, so they keep you entertained and engaged on your long, boring commute. And so when they understood that and started implementing that understanding into their marketing messaging and the way they were creating the milkshakes and so on, they found that it actually gave them a 7 times bigger addressable market than they had previously understood to be available for milkshakes. So I think that's really interesting, that understanding the job that your customer is trying to do can get you to more effective messaging quickly than getting bogged down in creating personas. And there's just a really kind of light, humorous example here from Intercom, who, you know, where the reason someone bought a Snickers has nothing to do with the fact that they have a degree in marketing, have an active lifestyle, have 2 dogs, and so on. And you can, if you think back to some of the Snickers ads, you can see how an understanding of this jobs to be done framework played out in terms of their classic "you're not you when you're hungry" ads. And I guess the key here is that, you know, Snickers aren't selling chocolate based on the features of the chocolate. There's nothing about what the cocoa percentage is, or, you know, where the peanuts come from. They're doing it on, you know, the reasons why people choose Snickers. But how do you arrive at this? How do you kind of uncover this? And again, we come back to this guy with the big ears listening to the customers. You know, and big comprehensive market research pieces are expensive, but you can get a surprising amount from a handful of qualitative interviews, inexpensive but well-crafted surveys. Conduct a few one-to-one calls with some of your customers to understand why they chose you, what they were thinking about at that point, what else they would have done instead. They can be Zoom calls. You could be following your customers around a supermarket if you're an FMCG brand. You could be visiting them in their homes to see how they use it, what cupboard they put it in, what are the triggers for them reaching for it. Watch how people are buying, using, or navigating your product, and really, really pay attention to the language that they use, because often we find that founders are describing their product in a certain way, and it's often quite technical, quite feature related. It's all about us. And when you hear the customers describe it, they might use common phrases in a completely different way, and that can really open up your key messaging and the language that you use about your product and how people relate to understanding that that your product or service solves their problems. But let's assume for a minute that you've established some confidence in your product market fit and you're now looking for more customers. Any amount of articles can be found online telling you that the marketing funnel is dead. Don't listen to them. As with any kind of sweeping statement that something is dead, it's just not the case. That's not to say that the funnel isn't an oversimplification. Of course it is. Not all your buyers will obediently walk through the stages of, you know, awareness, interest, desire, action, and so on. Some will leap straight to purchase. Others will hang around consideration for donkey's years. Some will purchase and then go back round. It doesn't matter. It's messy. But that doesn't mean it's not helpful, because at any given moment, all of your addressable market sits somewhere along this funnel. And so find ways of taking snapshots of it and seeing how it shifts over time based on the activities that you're doing. Find where the gaps are, find where people are dropping off. Doesn't matter that it's not going to be linear. Everybody is going to be somewhere in those orbits. So consider them in your marketing planning and find a way of taking those snapshots over time to help you see and plug the most pressing leaks. We're going to touch on awareness at this point, because really that's your kind of...
What are you saying, Ray?
I'm saying...
Sorry. I'm going to focus in on awareness at this point, because I think that's your kind of the next most pressing problem. Once we've dismissed that if you build it they will come mentality, we realize that, you know, they can only come if they know, one, that we exist, and two, what we do are, and more importantly, what's in it for them.
What are you saying, Ray?
I'm saying, what's in it for me?
So there's your customer again, angrily shouting about what's in it for them. From a practical perspective, awareness, we talk about awareness, but it's really helpful if we break it down into lots of different areas. So you could break it down into problem awareness, solution awareness, and product awareness. And when we get to product awareness, you can think about prompted awareness and unprompted awareness. So just very briefly, prompted is, if I tell you the name of my brand, what are the things that come to mind? So that's, do you remember that Coke is red? Do you remember that Nike is about just doing it? Those kind of brand awareness things. Unprompted awareness is, if you're feeling hot and you want a drink, what are you going to look for in the supermarket? What brands are going to come immediately to mind? And it's that unprompted awareness which is super valuable. But I'm going to dive deeper in just now into problem, solution, and product awareness, because I think that's the thing that's most useful for startups to kind of work through. So awareness has stages, and I've broken them down here. I'm not going to read this slide out. I'm going to kind of leave that with you to take away and look at afterwards. But people go through this stage of being, you know, unaware that they've got a problem. They know they have a problem. They're not yet aware that there are solutions to this. This all sounds very B2B, but in a way it's true of B2C as well, because your problem might be to do with self-esteem, or what you're hungry, or what kind of mood you want to be in, or all sorts of things. When they become solution aware, they're looking for alternatives, they're looking for solutions, they're scanning the shelves, they're Googling products. Then there's product aware, active research, where you want to be part of that consideration set. And so we've just made some suggestions for how communications changes during that awareness journey. So when people are at the unaware stage, you might be asking questions, trying to elicit a response where people go, oh yes, me too, I have that issue. When the problem aware, you want to focus on that problem, you want to make them feel like that problem is really important, and they want a desire to build something better. Then you lead with the solution when people come solution aware, framing it as, you know, that now you can initiative. And when you're, you know, measuring awareness, as I've mentioned, you want to think also about prompted and unprompted. And unprompted is what we would call being easy to mind. So that when someone enters a category, when someone wants something, or they feel hungry, or they're annoyed with Excel, or whatever it is that might trigger them to look for a solution, you want to come easy to mind. And so that's something that you might hear referred to as brand awareness, sometimes mental availability, but it's really about being easy to mind, which is where we are going next. So what got you here won't get you there. And this is really about this idea of the long and the short, about being both easy to mind and easy to find. Just have a drink. So what you'll find as a startup, as you grow, is that what fuels your first phases of growth will likely plateau. For many startup and scale-up brands, this manifests as an over-reliance on performance marketing. And perhaps you find that it's no longer delivering the value and volume it once did. Maybe your cost per acquisitions are starting to kind of tail off or starting to go up. As a marketing team, you might find yourself spending more and more time coming up with creatives and content solely to feed the algorithm, rather than focusing on what's really moving the needle for your business or your next kind of strategic decisions. And one of the things that I feel it's really important that we always draw founders' attention to, and early marketing teams' attention to, is that people are multi-channel. You know, we live online, we live in the real world, we live in social media. And when your budget allows, and this obviously isn't always possible at the very early stages, but when it allows, there are additional relevant channels will deliver you incremental increases in your ROI. And we know this can be harder for startups, but keep it in mind as you grow. So I've linked here in the notes, which we'll send out at the end, to a case study from Mark Ritson. And this is just showing growth, incremental growth, basically, as they're adding channels into this campaign, in this case for Dare in Australia. Having performance marketing kind of be your only or your main channel, it's a bit like having an orchestra with only violins. You know, they can be virtuosos, but you miss that sort of the percussion, which is the brand beat, or the trusted reach of the PR being the brass section, or the kind of organic appeal of the woodwind, or, you know, you need to kind of bring it all together. And I know I'm stretching that metaphor really thin, but the point is this, that channels work in tandem with a multiplier effect. Another way of thinking about this, of course, is the long and the short. And many of you may be familiar with this research. It came out a while ago, but it's, you know, we've seen it kind of growing and growing over the last 10 years in terms of adoption. And this is really where Binet and Field did a fantastic piece of research, which has been updated over the years. But what they showed was that across categories, very, very broadly, there is a balance at which brands see the optimum results. And that is for B2C brands, spending about 60% on that brand, on the easy to mind, and about 40% on the performance, on the easy to find. B2B brands, it's a bit more like 50-50. Very recently, they looked at it for startups, and they have arrived at 65-35 maybe for year one startups. I can tell you from experience, 35% of a media budget on a year one startup going into brand is pretty unusual, but it's something to kind of aim for. And it's, of course, you've got to make enough revenue now to be able to pay to do this stuff. But I think it's worth always keeping in mind that the earlier you can start to think about easy to mind as well as easy to find, you're setting yourself up for your year 2 and year 3 sales. So just to explain this graph to anyone who hasn't seen it, the effect of sales activation of performance marketing is seen in the yellow line. It's a bit like putting your foot on the accelerator of your car. You turn the money on, you push down on the accelerator, you go forward, you stop, you take your foot, you drop right back down. If you're building brand along the way, which is this orange line, then you see it growing. You see your baseline growing from which you start. And that's shown really well in this second chart, which is an updating of it done by Grace Kite and Tom Roach, who are 2 fantastic people to follow on LinkedIn. They're always putting out loads of interesting insight. And you can really see at the beginning, there's that kind of growth from performance marketing, then it plateaus. And then when you start doing the brand building, you start setting yourself up for future kind of more sustainable growth. Brand also has a lot of other benefits. So this is a great little chart that's come from the B2B Institute. They put a really interesting free paper out about 5 principles of growth, which I would really recommend to anyone. But you can see here that your sales activation, your performance marketing grows your short-term sales. And what layering brand on top of that does is it also supports your short-term sales, but it gives you long-term sales. It gives you pricing power, the ability to, to not be discounting all the time. Category optionality means that you can take your brand into the category next door if you need. So talent acquisition to make sure that your employer brand stays strong, and competitive moat, because keeping all of the features of your product distinctive is really difficult, but keeping a distinctive proposition in the mind of your prospect means that even when your competitors are offering very similar products, that you're still standing out, you're still seen as the go-to in the area. I'm only going to touch on these really lightly. I find them really interesting, but I am a complete geek. But these are, again, some studies from the IPA data bank, which the graph on the left shows you what happens when you add in brand and activation. So it starts with low brand, low activation. The second bar along that says 1.2, that's a lot of performance marketing, less in brand. The interesting one for me is the third one along, high brand, low activation. That's the effect of primarily concentrating on brand, much less on performance. You can see it's actually outperforming the low brand, high activation. And then the one that performs best is where you do both, where you combine them. So it's the long and the short, not or. We're not at war here. We're trying to work together. The concept of mental availability and the effect of brand awareness, you can see on the right-hand side how that's driving long-term market share growth. It's driving your sales response, new customer acquisition, retention, pricing, and so on. So it's just a little bit of data to back up what we've been saying, and this can be the kind of thing that's quite useful to show to a startup C-suite and to a CFO in particular, who will, understand the language of graphs more than he understands the language of persuasion, maybe. Similarly, this is around the emotional and rational, but I think what's really interesting here from a startup perspective is particularly this chart on the left, where it shows that distinctiveness is much more effective than differentiation. So if you find that you have competitors who offer very similar product features to you, but you can occupy a distinctive place in the market, or a distinctive brand, or have a distinctive character. You might think about Monzo or a Starling Bank, or one of those kind of challenger brands, where a lot of it is about attitude and brand and the place that you occupy in your prospect's mind. That just shows the power of distinctiveness, which I find kind of reassuring as well. So what it really kind of boils down to is that balancing the long and the short is creating demand and capturing demand. It's easy to mind and easy to find, brand and performance. It's about, lasting effects and things that we want now. And it's really about melding the two. And often what we see in our startup clients is that that's the biggest hurdle, really, is getting people to think beyond, but I need sales this week, and to understand that if they can start to do any of this, then they're setting themselves up for a much happier kind of Q3, Q4, and into next year. Just to help kind of understand that now versus long, the in-market buyers versus the out-market buyers. If you're creating marketing collateral aimed at the in-market buyers in the short term, it's often quite a rational message, it's often quite narrowly targeted, and you're measuring it with sales metrics. If you're thinking about the buyers who are not in market right now, but who are all of your future pipeline, all of your future customers, often that's a slightly more emotional message. It's broader targeting, you're trying to market to the whole category, and you're measuring it with memory metrics. You want to be easy to mind when they come in to the market. So that, again, that's mental availability. It's that unprompted awareness that we keep coming back to. I've got two examples here. These were featured in Marketing Week. They really bring to life the slightly different kinds of messaging. So on the left here, we've got that kind of the in-market buyers, the rational messaging, and the buy now.
You'll like the amazing savings right now at SCS. This soap is incredible value at $3.99. This one's $5.79, but only if you're quick. And there's up to 50% off carpets, plus SCS will pay for the fitting. But hurry, because like it or not, this $2.99 sofa ends Sunday at SCS.
And then on the right, a slightly more brand focused, surprising from this company actually, slightly more brand focused, more emotional messaging, and probably more memorable in the long term.
Is it ready yet, Wallace?
Hold on a moment, your ladyship. You're gonna love this.
This is so exciting.
Ho ho!
Oh.
It has a built-in foot massager.
Gosh. Well, it's splendid.
Where are we off to from? What have you brought me here for? I already know how to make a sofa. Not a robotic gizmo inside.
Wonderful. Ooh. How yummy.
The Grand DFS Sale, where every sofa's handmade to order.
Oh, thank you. It's perfect.
I told you this was the place to come, Dad.
The Grand DFS Sale.
Oh, Wallace.
So really quite different approaches and messaging styles. And then the final pitfall that we're going to talk about, I'll let introduce itself.
Amen.
Perhaps again. So really, this is this idea of wanting everything everywhere all at once, which I think anyone who has been in a marketing team at a startup would be very familiar with this. Wanting it all. And really, the key thing here is that good strategy is about sacrifice. It's about understanding what to say no to. So just as with the Oscar-winning film, anyone who's seen it, trying to do or be everything everywhere all at once causes a meltdown so severe it threatens the existence of the multiverse. And in a marketing perspective, it threatens the existence of effective marketing. With a limited budget, your biggest enemy is distraction. And marketing is full of shiny tactics that will attract the eyes of your team, your founders, and anyone else who wants to give you helpful advice. So the key thing to remember is that whether it's kind of multiple products, cramming 6 key messages into every ad, the creation of multiple sub-brands, really understand that strategy is sacrifice. Understand that, doing all of these tactics without a strategy behind them is noise, and it's the noise before defeat. So how in practice do you bring this level of discipline into a startup or scale up? I mean, there's no sense in hiding the truth. This part is not easy. But there are some tools that we have found work quite well when we've been working with different founders, and they might be useful to you as well. The first one is this idea of the North Star metric. So it's a single metric that captures the core value that you deliver to your customers. I'd really recommend looking up Matt Lerner on this. He writes really well on it. He's got several videos which are really informative as well. But the key is that a North Star metric replaces all of the different siloed goals in your organization with a common target, and one that captures how customers would behave if they loved your product. So for example, taking a company like Facebook, they could measure all sorts of things. They could measure the number of accounts created. They could measure the number of posts made. They could measure, you know, all of these, how many videos are watched and so on. But when they were growing, they would have focused around a key metric, which was the number of daily active users. Because if the number of daily active users are going up, everything else will go up. And if there's something that's holding that back, then that would be a priority for everybody to fix. With Amazon, it would be repeat purchases, Spotify, the time that each user has spent listening. From a B2B perspective, you know, Salesforce might be looking at records created, HubSpot might be looking at weekly active teams, or Airbnb, number of nights booked, because those are the things which affect revenue, they affect everything else, but particularly for a startup, if you set revenue as that metric, then you can go a little bit astray in terms of your user experience. So you need to get your team together and do it as a workshop and get everyone to agree and buy in at that point. And everyone needs to know how what they're doing ladders up to that. That kind of clarifying attitude should also then be able to be translated through into campaign execution. So once you've got clear objectives and identified who you're targeting, you want to be able to tie everything to it across channels, so that your ad creative, your landing pages, your content is all laddering up to the same key objectives and the same key messages. And that's where we've chosen the second tool that we're going to share on this front, which is super simple. It's a message house. This is where you shape the key messages for your brand. And note, this isn't necessarily customer facing copy, it's the messages. So every piece of content and collateral should in some way land one of your core brand messages, each one being a kind of small hit that all add up to making you easy to mind. So in terms of the umbrella statement, this kind of roof at the top, I found it practical to combine it in a way with your positioning statement if you have one, but in any case, think about it as the space you want to occupy in your prospect's mind. So continuing our Snickers example, Snickers is a great, fun, tasty way to get energy quickly when you're hungry. That's their kind of key message. In terms of the pillars, those sort of key messages, they might have things like it tastes great, it's filling, it's high in energy, it's easy and quick. And then the proof points, the reasons to believe, are because it's got chocolate in it, it gives you energy and you believe it's filling because it contains nuts, and you believe that it's, you know, easy and quick because it's snack size and it's kind of available everywhere. So really this is about a set of messages that a marketing team would develop, perhaps along with PR, comms, and make sure that every time the founders or anyone in the business is talking about it, they understand there are certain things they need to land message-wise and what the proof points or what the reasons to believe are that they're going to go out with. Because by the time that you as a team have got totally sick of everything in this chart, you might just about be reaching the point where some of your customers are remembering any of it. So these messages, you want to take them into your content, your ad campaigns, your emails, your social media, your website, your landing pages, all of the things. And then just to make sure that that doesn't all become overwhelming is the final kind of tool and framework that we're going to share here today, which is one that was originally developed by Google to help people with their YouTube marketing. It's called Hero, Hub and Hygiene, and it's a really nice way of thinking about that kind of hierarchy of the different kinds of content that you might want to create. So your hub, your hygiene, at the bottom is your kind of workhorse content. It's very functional. It's often the first place that people encounter your brand. It's what people might find in a Google search. It's kind of going out weekly. It's on your socials. It's the you know, the day-to-day drumbeat, if you like. And then the hub is a little bit more around starting to think about brand awareness and engagement. It's more topical, it's more shareable, more creative, sticks around for people to discover, so it needs to have longevity and be inspiring and informative in a way that is relevant for your brand. So that might be things that you're creating that are maybe monthly or maybe every 2 months. And then your hero content, big, splashy, often a one-off campaign, gets you talked about. This is multi-channel, it's paid, owned and earned media. Maybe you're involving PR, maybe it's a big event, maybe you're publishing something. But the key, of course, is that you're planning this with your key messages in mind. You've kept your strategic focus. You're not getting distracted by the shiny objects. Everything is laddering up to making sure that you're occupying the space that you want to occupy in the mind of your prospect, so that you're easy to mind is kind of at the top of this, and easy to find is at the bottom of this. So just in summary, what we've kind of gone through today, the fallacy of if you build it, they will come. Remember, you're not the customer. Keep an eye on product market fit, understand different kinds of awareness and how you might want to respond to them. The long and the short, be both easy to mind and easy to find. And ultimately, strategy is sacrifice. Think about whether the North Star metric can be useful for you. Think about how to tie all of your activities and messaging into that position you want to occupy in the mind of your prospect. And finally, just before you start thinking about the shiny tactics and the execution, one final reminder.
So what's in it for me?
So yeah, we're here to help. We've dropped a lot on you there, but do get in touch if you want to talk about any of it in more detail. We've got plenty more up our sleeves as well, but wanted to keep it fairly sort of bite-sized. And yeah, let us know any questions.
Thank you so much, Jess, and what a perfect tune to end us on. Thank you again so much for everyone taking your time out of your busy schedule. We really hope that you learn at least something new in today's marketing masterclass. Big thanks, of course, to Jess for sharing such pearls of wisdom. We're here, we've got a few more minutes if anyone has got any questions. I've also just worked out why the chat function wasn't working earlier, so that should be working now. Thank you all so much again. As I said, if anyone is interested in taking the conversation further, I'm just popping in a link in the chat where you can book some time to speak to us directly. And you know, as a thank you, as a bit of a freebie, if you do want to deep dive into any of these areas or see how these frameworks and tools can be adapted for your businesses, then just drop us a slot in that Calendly link. You should be able to find a 30-minute slot, no obligation. You just get that one-to-one session with us. And actually, I know that this is perfect timing with Startups Magazine. Of course, big thanks to Anton as well for hosting us today. I know that there was a slide, actually, Jess, if you wouldn't mind, just while the questions come in, there was a slide at the start that we brushed over. Startups Magazine are actually hosting an event this evening for anyone in London. Anton, just while we're sharing the screen, do you want to share a bit more about that?
Sure. So it's a kind of our own attempt at formalizing like a Dragon's Den type pitching event. So we have a lot of, I don't know by name, but some pretty big VCs and then a lot of startups pitching their ideas. And it's going to be kind of, you know, back and forth. There we go. Yeah, show me the money. So it's going to be a lot of just, yeah, startups in the early stages, later stages, pitching things, what works, what doesn't work. I'll be hosting it. But contrary to most of our events, this one will be kind of more taken over by the so-called VCs that we have organized to speak tonight. But I think it'll be really cool. It's in Shoreditch. Tickets are £9 if you're around. Free drinks, or a couple drinks at least. Snacks and other stuff. Stephanie's going to be there. Jess, will you be there as well?
I'm not sure. I'm going to try. I live a little bit out of town, so.
Oh, okay.
Logistics.
Well, then you get a pass. But yeah, it's going to be really cool. The event space is really, really cool. I think it's close to sold out, this one. So I think it's one of our bigger events. But yeah, hopefully I'll see as many of you as possible there.
Do you know which VCs are going to be there, Anton? Are you able to share? I'm putting you on the spot there a little bit while I'm asking you that.
Okay, here we go. So we have Lizzie Parker, who's an enterprise acceleration manager at NatWest. Bertie Hertage is the founder of the Crowdfunding Coach, and Andrew Sears is a senior campaigns associate. Ida Taskin is portfolio manager at Antler. Reese Hayter is head of sales at Uncapped. And that is it. And then as for these startups who are pitching, I think that's kind of just a mishmash of certain people. But yeah.
Well, I've just popped the link in the chat as well. Sorry, that's my doorbell buzzing. So if anyone wants to are there, bring in the questions. I'm going to go and see who's at the door, but please put your questions in the chat and the guys will do their best to answer.
Oh, someone's just asking if they can have the slides. We will send them round. We'll send that round in a follow-up email. So, yeah. And there's lots of links I've put in them if you want to go and watch more detail on any of the case studies or read more about any of the references. Okay,
sorry, there's never.
And she's back.
That couldn't be a more perfect moment for the doorbell to go. Cool. Well, again, thank you all so much. I don't know if people are just kind of taking a moment to have a think about any questions. Obviously, there was a lot of information there. We wanted to make sure that they were transferable depending on the type of business, whether it's B2B, B2C. Obviously, this is more focused for startup scale-ups, but even within that, those are very specific stages of a business's growth journey. So wanted to deliver as much kind of value as possible with you guys today. But, you know, the Calendly link is there to book a slot and speak to us.
Yeah, I think it's you know, it's one of those things where you can keep including, because the reality is that with so much in marketing, the answer to everything begins with it depends. And actually, each of the startups that we work with have slightly different challenges, and so it's almost impossible to say, you know, here are 3 tools that will solve all of your problems. It's really, you know, here are 3 broad areas that we've noticed that people fall down on, you know, again and again in terms of the businesses that we work with, and that if you can work on these and get your house in order in that sense, then it helps to set you up for everything else. Because whether you're building a, you know, I don't know, a palace or a piece of modern architecture, you need good foundations, don't you? So I think that's where we've kind of tried to point everyone to today. So if we don't have any questions.
So there's never the right moment for the doorbell to go. Sonia's saying the chat still doesn't work. So sorry about the tech issues there. But what I can also do as well is I'll just pop my LinkedIn link in the chat as well. If anyone does want to connect, Jess has shared some great people who post some great content on LinkedIn to follow. We do our best to keep up. So if anyone wants to connect with us, I'll just pop that in there. And yeah, as we said, the replay will be circulated. We'll have the slides shared around. So anyone who joined late, don't worry, we'll get that all over to you. We'll hang around for a few more minutes if anyone does have any questions. Otherwise, feel free to crack on with your busy days. So thank you all so much, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate it.